In April 1694, in the foggy streets of London's Bloomsbury Square, two men drew their swords for a duel. One was Edward Wilson, a flamboyant aristocrat known for his unexplained fortune. The other was John Law, a slender 23-year-old Scotsman with sharp calculating eyes and a photographic memory for numbers. Within seconds, Wilson lay bleeding to death on the cobblestones. Law was convicted of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to hang. Yet on the night before his execution, Law bribed his guards, climbed the brick walls of King's Bench Prison, and vanished into continental Europe. For 20 years, this fugitive supported himself across Amsterdam, Paris, and Venice as an elite high-stakes gambler. He calculated mathematical odds in card games faster than any man alive. And as he played, he realized something profound. The global economy was paralyzed by a shortage of gold and silver. Law believed metal coins were an obsolete constraint on commerce. Money, he argued, did not need physical value. Money only needed trust. 26 years after escaping the London gallows, this convicted fugitive was appointed Controller General of Finances for the Kingdom of France. He was handed total control over the French treasury, the royal mint, and foreign trade. In less than 4 years, John Law created the world's first modern paper currency, engineered the largest stock market mania in history, coined the word millionaire, and triggered a catastrophic financial collapse that set France on a collision course with violent revolution. In September 1715, King Louis XIV died after ruling France for 72 years. He left behind the Palace of Versailles and a nation buried under 3 billion livres of sovereign debt. France's annual tax revenues were roughly 145 million livres, while annual interest payments exceeded 89 million livres. The royal treasury was empty, soldiers went unpaid, government bonds traded at an 80% discount, and merchants refused credit. Power fell to the regent, Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, an exhausted ruler in a heavy powdered wig facing national bankruptcy. French ministers proposed defaulting on the debt entirely. Then, John Law walked into the regent's palace. Law presented Philippe with a radical proposal detailed in his 1705 treatise, Money and Trade Considered Star. Law explained that France was not poor because it lacked resources. France was poor because scarce gold and silver suffocated trade. His solution: replace scarce metal coins with paper banknotes issued by a central bank. Paper money could be expanded to match the exact commercial needs of the nation. Desperate for a solution, the regent granted Law a charter in May 1716 to establish the Banque Générale Star. Law's private bank began issuing paper banknotes denominated in French livres, backed by gold and silver reserves. To build instant public trust, Law promised that his banknotes could be exchanged at the bank for the exact quantity of gold specified on the note. Even more importantly, the French crown decreed that taxes could be paid using Law's paper banknotes. Almost overnight, demand for paper notes surged. Merchants realized that carrying paper was faster, safer, and more reliable than hauling heavy chests of silver across muddy roads. French commerce accelerated. Interest rates dropped from 7% to 4%, and the bankrupt economy revived. John Law had pulled off a financial miracle, and that early success convinced both Law and the regent that they had unlocked the secret to infinite wealth. Having revolutionized the banking system, Law turned to a vastly bigger ambition, eliminating the entire national debt of France. In August 1717, Law acquired the Company d'Occident known as the Mississippi Company. The company held an exclusive 25-year commercial monopoly over French Louisiana, a vast wilderness spanning over one-third of the modern continental United States. In May 1719, Law absorbed the French East India Company and China Company, creating a massive monopoly named the Company des Indes Star. Law now controlled all French trade outside of Europe. To tie his corporate empire directly to the state, Law offered the regent an audacious deal. The French government owed 3 billion livres to citizens holding state bonds. Law proposed that the government allow citizens to buy shares in the Mississippi Company using their depreciated bonds at full face value. In exchange, the French state transferred its debt to Law's company at a manageable 3% interest rate. The sovereign debt of France was converted into corporate stock. To make the shares irresistible, Law launched an aggressive marketing campaign across Paris. Pamphlets described Louisiana as an untouched paradise where mountains of solid gold lined the Mississippi River. Engravings showed native tribes trading raw gold nuggets to French settlers for simple knives and beads. In reality, Louisiana was a malaria-ridden swamp, with fewer than 800 French settlers struggling to survive. To maintain the illusion of colonization, Law emptied Parisian prisons, rounded up vagrants, and marched them in chains to Le Havre to board ships for America. Back in Paris, nobody cared about the reality in the swamps. Everyone wanted the stock. In early 1719, Mississippi Company shares were issued at 500 livres each. By the summer of 1719, trading moved to a narrow cobblestone alley in Paris, the asterisk Rue Quincampoix star. The street transformed into the world's first open-air financial casino. Every morning, a bell rang at 6 o'clock, and thousands flooded into the alley, screaming buy and sell orders until nightfall. Dukes and duchesses brushed shoulders with servants, chimney sweeps, and stable boys. The demand for space was so intense that a local cobbler rented out his tiny workshop for 200 livres a day just so traders could write contracts inside. A hunchbacked man made a fortune by renting out his curved back as a mobile writing desk for frantic brokers. By October 1719, the share price crossed 5,000 livres. By December 1719, shares hit 10,000 livres, a 2,000% gain in less than a year. The French language coined a new word to describe this class of overnight fortunes, asterisk millionaire star. Former footmen who bought a handful of shares suddenly owned carriages, country estates, and diamond rings. One servant, sent by his master to sell shares at 8,000 livres, waited until the price hit 10,000, kept the 2,000 livre difference, and bought his master's mansion. In January 1720, John Law reached the apex of his power. The regent appointed him Comptroller General of Finances. Law merged the Mississippi Company with the Royal Bank, making him supreme ruler of both France's money supply and foreign trade. Yet behind the glittering facade, Law had trapped himself in a fatal contradiction. To keep the stock price rising, the Royal Bank printed hundreds of millions of unbacked paper banknotes to lend to investors so they could buy more shares. By early 1720, the bank had printed over 1 billion livres of paper money, more than 4 times the total physical gold and silver in France. Law had engineered an artificial loop: print paper, buy stock, push up the price, and print more paper to justify the valuation. The engine worked flawlessly, until someone tried to pull their money out. The first crack appeared when wealthy aristocrats realized the paper wealth was an illusion. The Prince de Conti, furious after an argument with Law over share allocations, loaded 3 wooden wagons with paper banknotes, drove them to the Royal Bank in Paris, and demanded immediate redemption in gold and silver coin. Law was forced to fill the wagons with bullion, draining a massive fraction of the bank's physical reserves in a single afternoon. Shortly after, Richard Cantillon, a shrewd Irish-French banker who had made a fortune speculating on the shares, recognized that the supply of paper notes vastly exceeded real economic output. Cantillon quietly sold every share he owned, converted his paper millions into gold, and smuggled his fortune out of France to Amsterdam and London. As more investors followed, Law watched his gold vaults drain. To prevent the bank from collapsing, Law resorted to desperate authoritarian measures. In February 1720, Law outlawed private ownership of more than 500 livres in gold or silver coins. Anyone caught holding excess gold faced heavy fines and total confiscation. He banned the production of gold jewelry and silver tableware. He gave police and informants the right to search private homes for hidden coins. Neighbors turned on neighbors for 20% finder's bounties. With gold banned, citizens were forced to use paper livres for every transaction. Predictably, the flood of paper money spilled into the real economy, triggering rampant inflation. Between 1719 and 1720, the price of bread, meat, and cloth in Paris tripled. Merchants refused paper money, demanding payment in grain or foreign coin. On May 21, 1720, Law made the fatal miscalculation that destroyed his empire. Recognizing the currency was overvalued, Law issued an official edict announcing that the value of Mississippi shares would be reduced from 9,000 to 5,000 livres, and paper banknotes would be slashed by 50%. The illusion shattered instantly. By officially admitting the paper was worth half of its face value, Law destroyed the singular ingredient that kept his system alive: public confidence. Panic erupted across France. Riots paralyzed the streets of Paris. On July 17, 1720, an enraged mob of 15,000 citizens stormed the gates of the Royal Bank on Rue Vivienne, demanding gold for their worthless paper. In the crush of the crowd, 15 people were trampled to death. Their corpses were loaded onto wooden carts and paraded by furious protesters straight to the gates of the regent's palace at the Palais Royal. Law's carriage was attacked and smashed to pieces. He barely escaped into the palace through a side door. By autumn 1720, Mississippi Company shares plummeted from 10,000 livres back down to 500 livres. The paper banknotes were officially declared worthless scrap. Thousands of French families were left bankrupt, clutching stacks of paper that could not buy a loaf of bread. In December 1720, John Law was stripped of all his titles and offices. Disguised in a plain traveler's cloak, carrying only a few hundred gold coins and a single diamond ring given to him by the regent, Law fled France under cover of night. He spent the remaining 9 years of his life drifting through European gambling halls, living in drafty rented rooms. He died penniless of pneumonia in Venice in March 1729, at the age of 57. Back in France, the trauma of the Mississippi bubble scarred the nation for generations. The French public developed a century-long distrust of paper currency and central banks. The French monarchy absorbed the shattered remnants of the debt, leaving the crown perpetually starved of credit. 70 years later, that unresolved fiscal crisis boiled over into the French Revolution of 1789, sending King Louis XVI to the guillotine. If you enjoy diving into the financial crises and hidden economics that shaped civilization, make sure to subscribe and share this story. Fast forward back to today. It is easy to look back at the crowds on Rue Quincampoix and dismiss the Mississippi bubble as 18th century madness. Yet every modern currency on planet Earth operates on the exact philosophical foundation that John Law conceived. Your paper bills and digital bank balances have no intrinsic physical backing. They are not redeemable for gold, silver, or land. They function entirely because of a shared psychological consensus between citizens and central banks. When central banks expand their balance sheets to bail out financial crises, they are running the playbook John Law invented in 1716. John Law proved that you can create paper wealth out of thin air. He also proved that trust takes decades to build, months to inflate, and a single morning to evaporate. In the end, John Law was never an economist. He was a gambler who calculated odds in the smoky taverns of London. He made the ultimate bet against human nature, and the house always wins.